Could Donetsk really be on the brink of collapse as Moscow insists? Or did the battlefield just deliver a brutal rebuttal? That was the question hanging over eastern Ukraine when Russian forces launched what was meant to be a decisive mechanized assault in the Donetsk region. Almost immediately, the answer arrived in flames. Ukrainian defenders did not merely slow the advance, they shattered it, turning the battlefield into a graveyard of burned-out armor and wrecked engineering equipment. For viewers watching from afar, the scale of destruction was impossible to ignore, and it raised a second, equally important question. If Russia cannot push forward here, what does that say about its broader war aims? The assault unfolded as Russia attempted to force momentum through massed armor and infantry, a familiar tactic that has repeatedly failed across the Eastern Front. According to Ukrainian military reporting and corroborated by independent analysts, several tanks and armored vehicles moved toward Ukrainian positions under the assumption that speed and weight would overwhelm defenders. Instead, Ukrainian unmanned units detected the buildup early, setting the stage for a devastating counteraction. Within minutes, Russian vehicles were struck immobilized and then systematically destroyed, leaving thick smoke columns visible for kilometers. What made this engagement particularly significant was not just the number of vehicles lost, but the type of equipment Russia committed. Among the destroyed assets was a rare MTU-20 bridge-laying vehicle, a critical enabler designed to help armor cross soft ground and anti-tank obstacles. Its loss immediately halted the assault. Without the bridge layer, tanks could not maneuver forward, infantry lost cover, and the entire operation stalled. In modern warfare, such a failure is not merely tactical, it is economic. Each destroyed vehicle represents millions of dollars in sunk costs, production delays, and logistical strain for an already pressured Russian defense industry. Ukraine's 427th Separate Regiment of Unmanned Systems, known as RAYROG, played a central role in this counterstrike. Drone operators identified targets, coordinated attacks, and neutralized the assault before it could threaten Ukrainian defensive lines. This was not chaotic resistance. It was disciplined, data-driven warfare. FPV drones slammed into armored hulls, struck vulnerable points, and followed up with explosive payloads until recovery became impossible. The message was unmistakable: any large-scale Russian push in Donetsk now risks catastrophic losses before it even reaches Ukrainian trenches. Strategically, the implications extend far beyond this single battlefield. Moscow has framed Donetsk as a prize it is on the verge of seizing, a claim repeatedly echoed in political messaging, aimed at both domestic audiences and international negotiators. Yet the reality on the ground tells a different story. The failure of this assault underscores how difficult, costly, and time-consuming further advances will be, especially against layered Ukrainian defenses supported by Western intelligence training and equipment. NATO's indirect role looms large here, shaping Ukrainian capabilities without direct troop involvement. As the smoke cleared over Donetsk, one truth became hard to deny: this was not the image of an army on the cusp of victory. It was the image of momentum burning away. And if such assaults keep ending like this, how long can Russia sustain both the battlefield losses and the economic drain they represent? The destruction of the MTU-20 bridge layer transformed what might have been written off as another failed Russian push into something far more revealing about the war's direction. Why would Moscow risk such a rare and valuable asset unless it believed the breakthrough was essential and imminent? That single question exposes the pressure Russia now faces along the Donetsk front. The MTU-20 is not frontline cannon fodder. It is a specialized engineering vehicle intended to solve one problem: only getting armor across terrain that would otherwise halt an advance. When Ukraine destroyed it, the entire assault concept collapsed in real time. Bridge layers, like the MTU-20, exist because modern battlefields are designed to trap armor. Anti-tank ditches cratered ground mined fields and destroyed infrastructure, force attackers into predictable corridors. Russia committed this asset because without it, tanks would have stalled short of Ukrainian positions, exposed to artillery drones and precision strikes. Instead, the bridge layer itself became the most vulnerable target on the field. Once Ukrainian drones locked onto it, the assault lost its spine. Tanks without mobility are not shock weapons, they are stationary targets. From an economic perspective, the loss was severe. Defense analysts estimate that Russia possesses only a limited number of modern bridge-laying systems, and replacing one is neither fast nor cheap. Western sanctions have already strained Russia's ability to produce complex armored systems at scale, especially those requiring advanced hydraulics, optics, and electronics. Each destroyed MTU-20 represents not only a battlefield setback, but months, possibly years of production bottlenecks. This is where battlefield tactics intersect directly with economic warfare. Military analysts quoted by Western media have repeatedly stressed that Russia's losses in engineering equipment are quietly among its most damaging. Tanks can sometimes be refurbished from older stocks. Specialized vehicles cannot. Reuters and Defense News have both noted that Russia increasingly relies on improvised solutions as modern systems disappear from the battlefield. That trend was visible here. When the bridge layer went up in flames, there was no immediate replacement, no alternate crossing plan, only retreat or destruction. The consequences rippled outward. Infantry units advancing behind the armors suddenly found themselves exposed, stripped of protection they were promised. This is not just a tactical failure, but a morale shock. Russian troops have already been documented advancing with inadequate protection in other sectors. And the sudden loss of armored cover reinforces a growing perception among frontline soldiers that plans are fragile and support is unreliable. Historically, such moments accelerate combat fatigue and erode cohesion. Strategically, this single loss reinforces why Ukraine's drone-centric approach has become so effective. By targeting enablers instead of mass formations, Ukraine maximizes impact while minimizing resources. NATO planners have taken note. Western military observers increasingly describe Ukraine as a live laboratory for modern combined arms denial, where precision surveillance and timing matter more than sheer numbers. The MTU-20's destruction fits that pattern perfectly, and yet this raises another question that hangs over the Donetsk front. If Russia is already risking rare assets to gain ground here, what happens when it reaches even more fortified terrain ahead? The events in Donetsk did more than stop a single assault. They showcased a model of warfare that is reshaping the entire conflict. How did a relatively young Ukrainian drone regiment repeatedly dismantle a mechanized force that on paper should have had the advantage? The answer lies in how the Rayrog regiment operates not as a collection of individual drone pilots, but as an integrated system built around data timing and precision. What unfolded was not improvisation under fire. It was execution of a doctrine refined through months of combat. Rayrog's role in Donetsk illustrates a broader transformation in Ukraine's military structure. Formed in the early stages of the war and expanded rapidly since the regiment now functions as a dedicated unmanned systems force, capable of reconnaissance, electronic warfare support, and strike coordination. In this engagement, Ukrainian sensors detected the Russian buildup before contact was made. Drones tracked vehicle movement, identified the bridge layer as the operational linchpin, and prioritized it accordingly. Once the MTU-20 was neutralized, follow-on strikes against tanks and armored vehicles became almost routine. This approach is cost-effective in a way that traditional armored warfare is not. A single FPV drone costing a fraction of a tank shell can disable or destroy equipment worth millions. From an economic warfare perspective, this asymmetry is devastating for Russia. Western analysts have repeatedly highlighted that Ukraine's drone strategy forces Moscow into a losing exchange rate, spending far more to replace equipment than Ukraine spends to destroy it. Over time, that imbalance compounds, draining industrial capacity and stressing supply chains already weakened by sanctions and export controls. The professionalism of the operation also matters. Video footage released after the strike showed not random explosions, but methodical targeting, multiple hits on the same vehicle, confirmation of destruction, and rapid transition to the next objective. Military Watch magazine has noted that such discipline reflects extensive training and a command structure capable of coordinating dozens of operators simultaneously. This is where NATO's indirect influence becomes visible. While no NATO troops are present, Western training programs, intelligence sharing, and doctrinal exchange have shaped how units like Rayrog fight. The psychological impact should not be underestimated. Russian crews witnessing bridge layers and tanks destroyed before engagement even begins face a battlefield where movement itself is lethal. This shifts behavior slower, advances greater caution, and ultimately fewer attempts at decisive breakthroughs. For Ukraine, that hesitation buys time, preserves defensive lines, and creates opportunities for further strikes. It also reinforces the narrative that Russia's numerical advantages no longer translate into operational success. Importantly, Rayrog's effectiveness is not an isolated case. Similar tactics have been observed around Chasiv Yar, Avdiivka's outskirts, and deeper into the Donetsk region. Each engagement reinforces the same lesson: modern assaults without air superiority and effective counter-drone measures are increasingly untenable. Western experts now openly debate whether Ukraine's experience will reshape NATO doctrine itself in the coming decade. As Rayrog's reputation grows and recruitment expands, its influence on the battlefield is likely to increase. But this success also sets the stage for the next challenge, because Donetsk is not just one battlefield, but a gateway to something far more formidable ahead. What unfolded in Donetsk was not a turning point, but it was a warning. And warnings can be strategically decisive. If Russia cannot execute a clean breakthrough, even with armor engineering support and preparation, how realistic are its claims of imminent victory? The failed assault forces a reassessment of Moscow's narrative, particularly as it relates to timelines, resources, and political messaging aimed at both domestic and foreign audiences. Russian leadership has repeatedly framed Donetsk as a region on the edge of collapse, a claim designed to project inevitability. Yet the reality exposed by this battle is far less convincing. Analysts tracking Russian operations note a pattern: marginal territorial gains achieved at disproportionate cost. Each failed assault consumes trained personnel, destroys irreplaceable equipment, and erodes operational flexibility. From a military standpoint, this is attrition without momentum. From an economic standpoint, it is unsustainable. Western defense experts quoted in recent reporting emphasize that Russia's industrial base, while large, is not limitless. Tank losses alone run into the hundreds annually, and specialized vehicles like bridge layers magnify the strain. Defense News has highlighted that Russia increasingly reactivates older, less capable platforms to compensate an approach that reduces effectiveness while increasing vulnerability to modern Ukrainian tactics. This failed Donetsk assault fits squarely into that pattern. The strategic implications extend beyond Russia's internal calculations. NATO and US planners closely monitor such engagements to assess Ukraine's defensive resilience and Russia's offensive capacity. Under President Donald Trump, Washington has continued to frame Ukraine as a frontline buffer against broader instability in Europe. While debates over aid levels persist, events like this reinforce the argument that Ukrainian forces can convert Western support into tangible battlefield results. For NATO allies, that matters. It validates continued investment in training, intelligence sharing, and advanced systems. Economically, the damage compounds. Each destroyed vehicle represents not only military loss, but also pressure on Russia's budget at a time when energy revenues, long a financial lifeline, face increasing disruption. Ukrainian strikes on refineries, fuel depots, and logistics hubs elsewhere in the country have already forced Russia to divert resources inward. Combined with battlefield losses in Donetsk, the financial burden deepens. The war is no longer just fought at the front. It is draining Moscow's capacity to sustain prolonged conflict. At the same time, Ukraine avoids overclaiming. Officials have been careful not to portray the Donetsk engagement as decisive, instead emphasizing its tactical significance. This restraint strengthens credibility. It contrasts sharply with Russia's habit of inflating achievements, claims that are increasingly contradicted by visual evidence and independent analysis. In information warfare, credibility becomes a strategic asset, yet Donetsk remains contested. The front line has not collapsed, and neither side is disengaging. The failed assault does not end Russia's campaign, it complicates it. And beyond this battlefield lies an even greater challenge, one that could define the war's next phase: the fortified heart of Donetsk itself. Beyond the burned vehicles and shattered assault plans lies the real obstacle Russia faces in Donetsk: a dense layered defensive system often described by analysts as a fortress belt. Even if Moscow could seize more open ground, How does it break through cities designed for prolonged defense? This question has become central to assessments of the war's trajectory. And the answer explains why Russian timelines repeatedly slip. The remaining Ukrainian-held areas of Donetsk are not isolated towns. They are interconnected strongholds built up over years. Cities such as Kramatorsk, Slovyansk, and surrounding settlements form a defensive arc anchored on higher ground, reinforced infrastructure, and extensive trench networks. Western media, including the New York Times, has described this zone as one of the most fortified regions in Europe. For Russian forces advancing here would require sustained combined arms operations under constant drone surveillance, a scenario that recent events suggest is increasingly unrealistic. The economic cost of breaching such defenses would be staggering. Urban combat consumes ammunition at extraordinary rates, accelerates equipment losses, and demands continuous resupply. For Russia, already strained by sanctions and growing maintenance backlogs, this translates into long-term financial bleed. Analysts from the Institute for the Study of War have pointed out that even marginal progress in fortified terrain often costs Russia hundreds of casualties and dozens of vehicles. Multiply that across months or years, and the burden becomes immense. Ukraine, by contrast, benefits from defensive economics. Holding ground is cheaper than taking it, especially when defenders can rely on drones and precision strikes to blunt assaults before they reach city limits. NATO training and Western intelligence support have amplified this advantage, enabling Ukrainian units to anticipate attacks rather than react to them. The Donetsk assault, halted by Rayrog, fits this model perfectly. Stop the advance, early destroy enablers, and avoid costly close-quarters fighting. Russian leadership continues to suggest that only a fraction of Donetsk remains to be captured, but such percentages are misleading. What remains is not empty land. It is the hardest ground to take. Military experts increasingly argue that capturing the fortress belt would require a multi-year campaign, assuming uninterrupted resources and manpower. Under current conditions, that assumption is questionable. Ukraine's ongoing strikes against Russian energy infrastructure further complicate Moscow's calculations, threatening revenue streams needed to sustain prolonged operations. For NATO and the wider West, the significance is clear. As long as Ukraine holds this fortified core, the prospect of rapid Russian victory diminishes. This stabilizes the front and buys time for additional aid packages, training cycles, and adaptation to evolving tactics. Under President Trump, U.S. policy has emphasized burden sharing within NATO, and European allies have stepped up financing and production commitments. Donetsk's defenses are in effect a physical manifestation of that collective effort. Yet this standoff also raises uncomfortable questions. How long can Ukraine maintain these defenses under constant pressure? And how far will Russia go politically and economically to overcome them? The answers may shape not only Donetsk's fate, but the broader balance of the war. As the smoke from the failed Donetsk assault drifted away, another battle continued far from the front lines, the battle over perception. If Russia is truly winning, why does every major advance require exaggeration, denial, or outright contradiction by visual evidence? This question sits at the heart of Moscow's current strategy, one that relies as much on narrative dominance as on military force. Russian President Vladimir Putin has repeatedly claimed that cities across Donetsk and neighboring regions are on the verge of falling, statements often timed to diplomatic moments or internal political pressures. Yet independent verification frequently tells a different story. Satellite imagery, geolocated videos, and Ukrainian counterstrikes like the one carried out by the Rayrog regiment systematically undermine those claims. In Donetsk, burning armor and destroyed engineering vehicles offered proof that the front is not collapsing, but resisting fiercely. Western analysts increasingly argue that these inflated claims are not mistakes, but deliberate messaging. By projecting inevitability, Moscow aims to discourage Western support for Ukraine and influence negotiations. The Atlantic Council and other policy institutions have noted that such rhetoric is often directed at Washington, where perceptions of momentum can shape debates over aid and long-term commitment. Under President Donald Trump, U.S. policy has balanced pressure for negotiation with continued recognition of NATO's strategic interest in preventing Russian expansion. Battlefield reality, however, remains the ultimate arbiter. Ukraine has responded by letting evidence speak. Drone footage after action reports and confirmed strikes expose discrepancies between Russian statements and actual control on the ground. This transparency has become a strategic tool. It reassures partners, strengthens Ukraine's credibility, and reinforces the case for continued Western assistance. NATO officials privately acknowledge that such proof simplifies decision-making. Support is easier to justify when it clearly translates into defensive success. At the same time, the war's economic dimension tightens. Ukrainian attacks on Russian refineries, fuel depots, and logistics nodes have intensified, according to recent reporting by Reuters and the BBC. These strikes compound battlefield losses, forcing Russia to divert resources away from the front to protect domestic infrastructure. Combined with the attrition seen in Donetsk, the pressure becomes systemic. This is no longer a contest of territory alone, it is a struggle over endurance. Looking ahead, the lesson of Donetsk is stark. Russia can still fight, still inflict damage, but its path forward is neither quick nor cheap. Ukraine, backed by NATO's indirect support and Western industrial capacity, has demonstrated an ability to adapt faster than its opponent. The fortress belt remains intact, the drones remain active, and the narrative of inevitable Russian victory continues to erode under scrutiny. The question now is not whether Donetsk will fall tomorrow, but how long this grinding balance can last, and what it means for Europe's security order if it does. The failed Russian assault in Donetsk delivered more than a tactical setback. It exposed the deeper realities of the war. Ukraine's destruction of armor and a rare MTU-20 bridge layer demonstrated how modern drone warfare can neutralize traditional mechanized attacks at a fraction of the cost. Units like the Rayrog Regiment showed that precision data and coordination now outweigh mass and momentum. Economically, each destroyed vehicle adds pressure to Russia's strained defense industry, while Ukraine's continued strikes on Russian energy infrastructure tighten the financial vice. Strategically, the battle undercut claims that Donetsk is on the brink of collapse. The fortress belt of fortified cities remains intact, forcing Moscow into a costly, slow campaign with no guarantee of success. NATO's indirect role through training, intelligence, and sustained support has become a decisive factor, even without direct intervention. Under President Donald Trump, the United States and its allies continue to weigh negotiations against the hard evidence emerging from the battlefield. Looking ahead, the conflict points toward prolonged attrition rather than rapid breakthroughs. The key question now is this: can Russia sustain the economic and military cost of years more fighting, or will Ukraine's adaptive strategy continue to shift the balance? If you want deeper fact-based analysis on where this war is heading, subscribe to the channel and stay with